When Charlie Otero and his siblings came home from school that day, something immediately felt wrong. Their dog, Lucky, was outside, something that never happened. Charlie walked to the back door of the kitchen and stepped inside. On the stove, his mother's purse was flipped open, scattered and disheveled. That wasn't like her at all. She was always tidy, and the kitchen never looked that way. He called out, asking if anyone was home. Moments later, one of his siblings shouted, "Charlie, come quick! Mom and Dad are playing a bad trick on us." Charlie ran down the hall and into his parents' bedroom. What he saw would change his life forever. His mother was on the bed, his father on the floor. Both were tied up. His mother didn't even look like herself, and his father had a belt wrapped around his neck. In that moment, Charlie's heart sank. His world shattered in an instant. But this wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was the start of something darker, a calculated series of killings that would terrify Wichita and puzzle investigators for years. The man behind it called himself BTK. Bind, torture, kill. 3 words that defined one of America's most chilling serial killers. At around 3 p.m., Wichita police received a distress call from a local teenager. The Otero children had come home from school and found their parents and younger siblings unresponsive. Within minutes, patrol units arrived. What they saw confirmed every officer's worst fear. The home was unusually neat. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, and nothing appeared stolen. Yet every victim was found bound in a similar way, hands and feet tied with rope. To the trained eyes of investigators, this wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was methodical, planned, personal. Detectives began documenting the scene, photographs, fingerprints, and every tiny detail. The first major clue came from the phone line, which had been deliberately cut. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. They'd isolated the house before attacking. Word of the murder spread quickly across Wichita. Neighbors who had seen the family that morning were in disbelief. The Oteros were well liked, no enemies, no known disputes. The question on everyone's mind, why them? With no immediate suspects, detectives turned to behavioral patterns. The bindings, the lack of theft, and the deliberate cutting of the phone lines all pointed to something rare, a calculated killer. Forensic teams collected fibers, shoe prints, and possible DNA samples, hoping for a breakthrough. In the following days, police began piecing together movements in the neighborhood. Unfamiliar cars, strangers asking questions, odd phone calls. Everything was logged. Every detail mattered. Because whoever did this hadn't just committed a murder, they had sent a message. Hey guys, quick pause. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100 subscribers, and your support means a lot. Let's reach that goal together. Now, back to the video. Just 3 months later, April 4th, 1974. Kevin Bright and his sister Catherine had just come home from school and work. A normal afternoon in their quiet neighborhood. But the moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The air was still. The silence was heavier than usual. Then, out of nowhere, a man stepped out from the shadows. He was calm, too calm. He told them he was a fugitive, that he just needed their car and some money to get away. He promised no one would be hurt. But that promise would not last long. When he pulled out a cord from his bag, Kevin knew something was wrong. He tried to fight back. A gun went off, once, twice. Kevin fell to the floor, pretending to be dead. Then the man turned to Catherine. She screamed, fought, tried to break free, but the stranger's calm never broke. Moments later, she was gone. Kevin, bloodied and dazed, managed to escape the house and run for help. When police arrived, they found Catherine Bright inside, and no trace of the man who did it. For Wichita, this was the second brutal murder in just 3 months. And for detectives, it was becoming clear this wasn't random. This was the beginning of a pattern that would soon define one of the most methodical killers the city had ever seen. For months, Wichita lived in fear. A shadow was out there, silent, calculated, unstoppable. And then he spoke. It began in October 1974, when a single envelope arrived at the offices of a local TV station. Inside was a letter, handwritten, detailed, and disturbing. It described the Otero murders, every step, every moment, in ways only the killer could have known. The writer called himself something new, 3 letters, BTK. He said it stood for bind, torture, kill. He wanted credit. He wanted the city to know his name. And with that single letter, the quiet fear that had gripped Wichita turned into full-blown terror. Because now, the killer wasn't just watching. He was talking. The letter stunned Wichita police. It wasn't just confession, it was control. The writer taunted detectives, describing what he'd done, how he'd watched, how he'd planned. Every line dripped with arrogance and pride. For weeks, investigators worked around the clock, tracing typewriters, fingerprints, even the kind of paper used. But every lead hit a wall. The killer seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Reporters called it the BTK case. The name spread across headlines, whispered in homes, shouted on radios. Parents kept their doors locked. Kids were told not to walk alone. No one felt safe, not even the detectives hunting him. And then everything went quiet. Months passed, then years. No letters, no murders, just silence. But the silence wasn't peace. It was the calm before something darker. It had been 3 years since Wichita had last heard from the man who called himself BTK. People started to believe he was gone, maybe caught somewhere else, or dead. Life began to feel normal again. But on March 17, 1977, that illusion shattered. Police were called to a small home belonging to Shirley Vion, a 26-year-old mother of 3 children. When they arrived, they found the children locked in a bathroom, terrified, crying, but alive. They told officers a man had come to the door, said he was from the telephone company, and once inside, everything changed. He cut the phone line, he pulled a gun, he tied their mother up. The scene inside told the rest. The same knots, the same bindings, the same cold precision. BTK was back, and he had been watching all along.
For detectives, it was a nightmare reborn. The patterns matched too closely to deny, and once again he vanished into the quiet streets of Wichita. By the winter of 1977, Wichita had fallen quiet again. The name BTK wasn't spoken as often, only whispered. People were trying to move on. But BTK wasn't done. On the night of December 8th, 25-year-old Nancy Fox came home from work. She lived alone, neat, independent, careful. Her lights went out at the usual time. No one saw or heard anything unusual. The next morning, her employer noticed she hadn't shown up. When police arrived at her small duplex, the front door was locked. But what they found inside was all too familiar. Nancy was on her bed, bound, strangled. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Everything pointed to someone who knew exactly what he was doing. And then days later, it happened again. A letter arrived at KAKE-TV, a local news station. Inside was a detailed confession describing step by step what he'd done to Nancy Fox. He signed it with a name that would forever mark Wichita's history: BTK, bind, torture, kill. This was no longer just murder. It was theater. He wanted the world to know who he was and that he was still out there. After the murder of Nancy Fox, BTK went silent, at least for a while. But the silence didn't mean he stopped. He was still watching, still planning. In April 1979, a young woman named Anna Williams, 63, narrowly escaped becoming his next victim. He had broken into her home, waited for hours, but she came home late that night. When she finally returned, she found her house ransacked and a message left behind. BTK later sent her items stolen from her home, along with a letter that read, "You were lucky, you came home too late." Anna's survival haunted him. He said she broke his control. Then, in April 1985, BTK struck again. His victim was Maureen Hedge, a 53-year-old widow and Rader's own neighbor, just 6 houses away. He waited until late at night, broke into her home and strangled her. Then he took her body to his church, the same church where he served as president, and posed her for photographs before dumping her body by the roadside. It was one of his most disturbing acts, the complete merging of his public faith and private depravity. 5 years later, in January 1991, he killed again. His final known victim was Dolores D. Davis, age 62. He broke into her home in the early morning hours, bound and strangled her, then hid her body under a bridge before returning home to his family the next morning as if nothing had happened. That was the last murder. After Dolores Davis, BTK disappeared. For more than a decade, the city grew quiet again, not realizing the killer was living among them the whole time. 2004, Wichita, Kansas. For most people, the BTK case was nothing more than a chilling memory, a story parents whispered about to scare their kids. But then, he came back. A local TV station received a mysterious envelope. Inside were photographs, crime scene images that only the killer could have known, and a photocopy of a victim's driver's license that had been missing since the night of her death. The letter was signed with 3 simple letters: BTK. The city froze. After nearly 15 years of silence, the ghost had spoken again. Over the next few months, more packages began to appear. Puzzles, coded messages, and letters bragging about murders long past. He taunted police, asking if his writings could be traced back to him if sent on a floppy disk. The detectives played along. Send it, they told him, and he did. That disk would be his undoing. When investigators analyzed it, they found hidden data, a clue left behind by his own arrogance. The disk had been used at a church computer, registered to a man named Dennis Rader, a man who lived in Park City, a church president, a husband, a father, a man no one ever suspected. And when police ran the DNA from his daughter's medical record against the evidence from decades earlier, it was a perfect match. After 30 years of terror, the hunt was over. BTK had been hiding in plain sight.
Who is Dennis Rader? Before the world knew him as BTK, he was simply Dennis Lynn Rader, born March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. To outsiders, his childhood seemed ordinary. He grew up in a working-class family. His father was a plant worker, his mother a bookkeeper. But behind that normal image, something darker was forming. Even as a child, Rader showed disturbing behavior. He confessed later that he had violent fantasies from a young age about trapping and controlling people, about tying up animals. He admitted to hanging stray cats and dogs, not out of anger, but to feel power. When he spoke about it years later, he described it clinically, as if he was studying his own mind, not realizing that those were the early signs of a psychopath in the making. At school, he was quiet, polite, invisible. No one suspected the boy sitting in the back of the classroom would one day become a serial killer. After high school, he joined the U.S. Air Force in 1966. He served 4 years, disciplined, obedient, unnoticed. But even there, he said his fantasies never stopped. He learned order, control, structure, skills he would later use in his murders. When he returned to Kansas, he got married to Paula Deitz in 1971. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl. He worked ordinary jobs as a meat cutter, a factory employee. Later, as a compliance officer for Park City, he even became president of his local church council. To everyone around him, Dennis Rader was the model citizen. But beneath the calm surface, his urges were always there.
February 25, 2005. After decades of fear, investigation, and silence, the man known as BTK was finally in custody. When detectives confronted Dennis Rader, he didn't fight, he didn't run. He simply looked up and said, "I know why you're here." Inside the interrogation room, he spoke calmly, almost proudly, as if finally being recognized for his work. For hours, Rader detailed every killing, every plan, every rule he followed to feed his obsession. He called them projects, each one carefully prepared, from the stalking to the bindings to the photographs he kept as trophies. He explained how he lived 2 lives, one as a respected church leader, husband and father, the other a cold, methodical predator who named his murders like achievements in a diary. Detectives listened in disbelief. He showed no emotion, no regret, just a disturbing sense of satisfaction that the world finally knew his name. When the court asked if he understood the charges against him, 10 counts of first-degree murder, Rader simply said, "Yes, I do." Then, one by one, he described each killing in chilling, precise detail, as if reading a manual. The courtroom sat in silence. Families wept. but Rader's voice never trembled. In August 2005, Dennis Rader, the BTK Killer, was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. He will never walk free again. Behind bars, he remains talkative, writing letters, offering interviews, always eager to remind the world that BTK still exists. But now, behind the steel doors of a cell, he's nothing more than a man who finally lost control.
Hey guys, quick pause. If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're so close to 100 subscribers, and your support means a lot. Let's reach that goal together. Now, back to the video.